President Joe Biden opened his virtual meeting with China's Xi Jinping on Tuesday by saying their goal is to ensure competition does not veer into conflict. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping met virtually on Tuesday in the closest communication between the two countries' leaders since Biden took office in the month of January. And both sides noted points of tensions and issued public statements after the meeting that emphasized ways to avoid conflict. Xi told Biden the two sides need to improve communication. The two leaders traveled together when both were vice presidents and know each other very well.
I'm very happy to see my old friend.
当前啊，中美发展都处在关键阶段。人类是一个地球村，我们面临着诸多的挑战。中美作为世界前两大经济体和联合国安理会的常任理事国，应该加強溝通和合作，既辦好我們。
And to talk more about the significance of the virtual meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping and how that impacts Indonesia, we will talk to the Executive Director of Center of Reform on Economics, or Core Indonesia, Mohammad Faisal. Hi, Mas Faisal. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hello, good afternoon, Mbak Kania.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. Mas Faisal, tell us, we are seeing officials from both China and the U.S. have described this meeting as positive, cordial, constructive, which is important considering that tension have been really high in between those two countries in terms of geopolitical and economic terms. So do you see this meeting as an easing of tensions between U.S. and China?
Indeed. Yes, I think I agree. At least this talk can ease the tensions between the two superpowers following the trade war and other conflicting issues. Because before it was quite tense between the two, even despite the trade truce last 2 years. But then it becomes tense again through the phone conversation, etc., and also involving other issues, not just trade, of course, but also political and security, etc. And in this talk, we can see that Jinping even mentioned Biden as his old friend, for example, and the U.S. Biden also commit to not support Taiwan's independence. I think that's at least can ease the tensions between the two. Right. But yes, the talk has not resulted in concrete follow-up actions or immediate outcomes. But at least it gave the two leaders opportunity to sort of change the relations away from icy confrontations. They still maintain their stance on various issues, including trade. So there is still an obvious competition between the two. But at this stage, I think they try to prevent it from leading into a conflict.
Okay, at this stage. So there is are you saying there is a long way to go? Because in terms of trade tensions between the U.S. and China, do you see this meeting as the start, at least, to the restoration of trade relations between U.S. and China? Or is there some more ways to go?
Yeah, as there are yet concrete actions resulting from this talk, I think it remains unclear. I think it's too hasty to say that it's the start of the restoration. So it can ease the tensions. Maybe there is some improvement in the near future or in the future, but not necessarily a restoration to pre-trade war situations. With the trade truce in 2020, as we recall, China has bought more U.S. products and also had cut tariffs by half in 2019. It happened 2 years ago, but I think in terms of restoration, it's still a long way to go in the future.
Okay, because then Biden is also pressing for China to fulfill commitments to buy more U.S. goods and services in an agreement they call the Phase 1 deal. But as you mentioned earlier, China is still around 40% short from that goal. So what do you think is going to happen? Do you think China will buy or import more U.S. goods in the months to come, especially after this meeting?
Well, I think considering the current situations, the pandemic situations, the economic conditions of each of these countries, especially also China, as we know, China is also facing right now domestic issues regarding the property sector and also energy crisis. So I don't think the China will be buying more U.S. goods in the near future, or at least not until the end of 2021, until the end of this year.
Okay.
But maybe it will happen in next year, in 2022.
Okay. So, you know, in some ways, Indonesia has been benefiting from this trade war, trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Indonesia's export to the U.S. has increased as the U.S. Limited China's import. Do you think Indonesia can still continue to take advantage of the trade war and increase exports to both countries?
Yeah, honestly, I think Indonesia's ability to take advantage of the trade war is still quite minimum. Yes, that it is true that Indonesia can increase their export value or and also volume to the U.S. market. But in terms of the share of Indonesia export compared to total import market in the USA, I think it's still constant between 10 to 11%. So it's a bit stagnant. The problem is about the competitiveness because there is a stiff competition in the U.S. market with peer markets with peer countries like Vietnam, and Indonesia is also still facing non-tariff measures in the U.S. For certain products like the fishery products. But on the other hand, Indonesia's share to China, in terms Indonesia export share to Chinese market is increasing, but it has nothing to do with the trade war.
It has nothing
for example, in 2017, it has nothing to do with the trade war because in 2017 the share is 12%, and now it's about 23%. It has more to do with the downstreaming policy and in Chinese investments in the smelters in Indonesia, and they export and we export it to China, and that's why the export of iron and steel products is increasing, and the main destination is China.
The main destination. So what other strategies should Indonesia implement to take advantage of this uncertain situation between US and China?
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to improve the competitiveness of Indonesian exports product, especially the manufacturers, and especially for the US market, we also need to address the various non-tariff measures so we can penetrate better to the US market. And for China, as I mentioned earlier, it also has something to do with investment strategy in downstream industry. So downstreaming policy to increase added value and attracting Chinese investments is playing the big role in this situation. So we can increase our export share to China. And if we talk about other markets rather than or instead of US and China, it is also very important to diversify our export destinations and promote export to non-traditional markets like Africa and the Middle East.
Okay, so what this pandemic has taught us is that we can't really rely on one country for global supply or production of goods. As we know, China have been having some problems as well on production. So how do you assess Indonesia's current level of production? Can we step up and fulfill that role as fulfilling global supply of goods?
Well, actually, Indonesia does not have the same production problem as China, because China right now is having this supply disruption and have energy crisis that impacted on their production. But Indonesia's problem is more about the competitiveness, because we now facing expensive production costs, so it impacts on the price of our export goods. So it's very important in terms of to increase our production to improve our competitiveness, and we have some comparative advantage in certain areas, like right now we are taking advantage of the nickel industry, and it is very potential to fulfill the increasing global demand for electric vehicles, for example. So there are some strategies for us, some room for us to increase our role in the global supply chains if we have a proper policy, yeah,
Right.
including
right.
the downstreaming. Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you so much for that talk, Executive Director of Center
You're very welcome.
on Economics or Core Indonesia, Mohammad Faisal.